Okay, thank you very much for the invitation, for the opportunity to speak here. For different reasons. I think we are standing somewhat at a crossroads. That's first my institute, Juristus, from where I'm coming. We are just establishing a laboratory, Briggs Laboratory. This goes to be actually here that we are starting as well cooperation with experts here to work on it. Latin America in general was something for me personally that I have been recently in Cuba and started working on this topic as well. Development or growth. We are standing here again is something where actually I think the scientific community is as well a challenge to engage in different ways on these topics. Scientific community means as well that we have to include in teaching, I'm teaching currently in Shanghai, that we have to include in teaching these issues. I was pleased to see in the brief outline of this conference, of the forum, actually that it was mentioned in-depth adjustment. And I think this is, in a way, much more important than simply talking about the crisis. We are talking about the crisis, we started to talk too late about the crisis, because we didn't see the major issue that we are actually facing, a major adjustment, the need for a major adjustment. So, still the crisis, briefly at least, we have a geopolitical dimension of it, meaning that the overall shift between the polar centers is changing. We have a crisis in economic terms, that is what we are usually talking about, but it is as well an economic crisis. It concerns the entire life living conditions, not only, but as well the life orientations, where we will want to go with it. And this is, of course, closely linked to technological issues, where we face something that is interpreted by many in a similar way as the quantity of major cycles. And then we find a new constellation of resources. We should not only talk about the negative aspects, but as well about the positive potentialities that are there. Now, it seems to be new. At the same time, we face, especially in this area, talking about China, Latin America, and geopolitical changes, we face something that had been already mentioned a long time ago, namely by Adam Smith. And he compared China and the Netherlands, and said we face two major different roads to development. And he talked about the natural cause of things, natural progress of opulence, looking at China then. And this was a cause that was very much oriented to use value, to the living of people and what they immediately deal with it. It was not a growth orientation as we know it in standard economic terms. And this was actually the second cause he called an unnatural retrograde path. It was gain-oriented, and it was this Protestant ethics that Max Weber mentioned, that it was capitalism, the new capitalism that Marx mentioned. The question is, of course, if the second way is really sustainable. And if you look back at colonialism, 2 world wars going on from Europe, we may have questions there. Economically, we have this embedded orientation of the first pass. We have a use value orientation, and we have, of course, a capitalist system. We have, of course, a market system. But at the same time, it was actually what Adam Smith was talking about as well as the orientation of the commonwealth. And I'm not talking now about the commonwealth as a conglomeration of nations, but in terms of the orientation of what wealth, what growth, economic growth actually would mean. And it was very much, and this is something he was pointing out as well, it was very much based on innovation. So we are not talking about growth versus development, but we are talking about what is actually the understanding of growth, where do we want to go with it. And the ambassador, Zhu said in his opening remark, talking about green growth and the green path and looking for new ways. It's not about decreasing the aggregate demand, but it is finding a new way where we want to go with it. And Ambassador Castro-Neves talked as well about global value chain. So it's not about decreasing economic growth, but it is about thinking a way where do we want to go with it. And then we have, of course, today these major technological changes that have a major impact on the economic constellation. And the major impact on the economic constellation is actually coming from this economic background. It is what both Smith and Marx called at the end the tendency of the profit rate to fall. So we make more and more profit, we have more and more return, and at the same time we don't know in a way where to go with this money. At the same time, I'll come back later to this, we have a major inequality going hand in hand with it. If you look at the recent development, we have an increase of GDP, an increase of economic activities, but at the same time going hand in hand immediately a huge inequality. And this is wherever we look globally. Now, as I said, it is an anthroponomic crisis, capturing or concerning the entire lifestyle. It's more than just the question of the economic constellation of the region. Now, what happens? I only can briefly point on this. I call it 4 points. The one is the internalization trap. And this is especially linked now to China. It had been mentioned indirectly already, and it is a question of major challenge as well for the Latin American countries. I.e., before globalization, if you want, at least this new stage of globalization, we could easily externalize costs. We could easily say, we won't pay, somebody else does it. This is something we cannot do in any respect. Be it economically, be it environmentally, be it culturally. We are growing together. The other is agility trap. And agility trap, I refer to sociologist Talcott Parsons, is this concept of integrity. Integrity of society, which means as well the ability of the society to act. And this is seemingly diminishing. We have less and less abilities to act in our societies. This is at least the first impression we get. And then we have what I call overproduction openly. We produce too much, but at the same time, the problem is not really that we produce too much rubbish. This is, of course, sometimes a problem as well, but we produce too much in terms of inequality. We still have a major problem with supply of many goods, or many basic goods actually, for many people in all our societies. At the same time, we have, and this is this overproduction part, we have this problem that some people simply don't know what to do with these resources. And then I think what I call the fourth point is the agility open. we have increasingly, and this is something I find very interesting here in China, since I'm here now for about 1 year, and what I find as well very interesting in Latin America. The need and the potential, the recovery of potentials to get back to the ability to act, to get control of things by different peoples. It's not just the government is somewhere up there and we are, the people is left outside. We have a major thing there that we see actually there is a major push. We need to reintegrate society. We need to make things happen. And this is, I think, as well, at least some part behind the current reorientation of China. It has been mentioned before by some people. It's seen as a crisis, and I think it is not really about a crisis, but we should think about the reorientation here on domestic needs, on domestic potential, and how to integrate them into this global value chain. So I would like, but I skip this more or less here, to go into the theoretical details, but at least briefly mentioning, we are talking, of course, simply about economics in terms of accumulation. And there we have a specific regime, and then we are talking as well about regulation. We need, the last presentation said, we have to deal with the regulation of this. And this is not only a legal issue, but it is as well, first and first and foremost, it is a matter where do we want to go with it. And you said at the very end, it is a question of domestic needs, domestic orientation first. Now, whatever this means, there is of course the danger of protectionism, but I think we have to be careful there in terms of not simply rejecting this could be protectionist, this could be anti-globalist, so we have to go another way. We have then as well the immediate impact on the everyday life of people and how they can deal with it. This is another thing actually. This is something, if you go to some of the Latin Americas, they fit into one city here. It's the dimensions of how to regulate life in these completely different and differently developing circumstances. So I think these are simply interesting challenges. And interesting challenges especially for countries like China that are going through this change now in countries like the Latin Americas that are not simply following the old pathway and running into crisis. Or not running into crisis, but trying to find a way out and trying to find the way out with the old traditional means. It's fortunately not only me who is struck by the stubbornness of keeping things all away, but you find this in economics and wherever you go. So it is not, as I said, to say, okay, we don't need growth and we can look for other means of sustainable development. We find something else here. This is, of course, a major challenge. And we all know, or heard at least a little bit about human development approach, the new sustainability goals. These are things where we have to think in new ways of where we want to go. It's not just material growth, there are other values as well, there are other potentials. Now, still, where we are now is what I came recently across it in a publication by Subramanian as two major orientations of standard development. The one is, he mentions two extreme models. The one is the foreign finance direction. just get finance from outside, and implicit is the orientation on finance. Finance is more important than anything in the world. Finance growth is growth per se. And the other thing is the exportage. The mercantilist approach, what he calls the mercantilist model, another orientation of simply reducing the development on questions of growth and then hoping we will get there without further ado, and we have the automatic development, if you want, as consequence of this in terms of well-being, in terms of integrity of society, in terms of inequality. What we see, however, is just the opposite. We have, however, not just the opposite as such, but in my view, we have at the same time very much within this development that we face now, be it economic or be it beyond this, we have 5, I think, tensions and 5 potentials that we are seeing now hugely as well considered in politics, especially here, that in the areas that is relevant for our discussion here. These challenges, these tensions are, in my interpretation, as well potentials. Overproductions of goods, I said. What happens is that these goods are turning, in all respects, into negatives, into debts. It's the environmental issue, but it is as well the increasing disembedding of many things. And the most obvious is, of course, the financialization. What we have there, we have in many areas too much capital and don't know where to invest it anymore. So we invest it into the financial circus, and it is lost, it gets lost to the real economy. Which means we have societal abundance, and at the same time, we have the inequality of access. This is another issue that is currently on the agenda, where we have to find a way of how to make use out of the wealth of the abundance we have. It is again something in terms of material goods, but it is as well, and this is a little bit of paradox, it is as well, for instance, in terms of time. There are people who have too much time. And now I'm talking, for instance, about unemployed people. They want to work, they can work, meaning they're able to work, but they are not allowed to work because other people work too much. This is part of the story, and there could be many other stories added. And it is as well a mechanism of departmentalizing, segmenting life in a way that we don't allow people to live lives anymore, but they just have to fulfill roles. If you go to university now, today, it is about just do your job, kind of living or life comes afterwards. So the third point, and I just talked about education, it's the abundance of knowledge and the misdirection towards skills. And probably everybody who works in the educational sector can join into these complaints. The space for pre-studying, for exploring ideas, for asking or developing questions is getting smaller and smaller. What we have is a kind of drill. This is what you have to do. This is where you should just know the rules and where you have to apply them. But we are not interested in developing questions. I was coming recently across something where I was actually a little bit surprised that many of these gurus in information technology apparently have a very broad background in their education. So I'm always afraid when I see a computer, all these things, I always think there's only numbers. But these people who are leading figures in this area have a broad education, come from alternative schools, and kind of entered later, somewhat later in their career, this sector. So they know not just about technology, but they know something where they want to go with it and how it fits into the entire societal development. This was, I think, was interesting, and this is, I think, where we have to go back to. Spend the time for real education, for developing knowledge instead of simply developing the ability to apply skills. And then we have something else, that we have this individualization of products. It's economic problems. We have to look for our own way to find resources, to apply them, and to find a way of dealing with life. And at the same time, we do not see, or we are not able to live really, the fact that these are social issues. Look at traffic. The push towards individualization of traffic is amazing. At the same time, we have, and this coming back to China, where I think the new development, of course you have traffic here, and I have been standing in several traffic jams as well, which is not pleasant. But at the same time, you build a city, you build huge cities, and you have the communication that's in terms of traffic, metro and other means. You have the communication that's across the country with these high-speed trains, which I prefer actually to use than the flight. So this is something, it is not just about the individual problem, individual challenge to go from A to B, but it is something where we have to get new ways of understanding. This is actually, especially when we look at traffic, as well something where we come to this question, how do we want, or what kind of globalization do we want? Because there are these local resources, regional resources, where we have to make better use out of them, instead of producing something here, transporting it to the other end of the world, and producing the same thing there with a different label, and produce it to the point A. These are paradoxes we have to face, and I think where we have to look as well, and this is the last point, where we have as well to look for new ways of what is called shared governance. We have this beautiful world as well, we have this beautiful world, and everything is now about governance. And I think that is indeed a major issue where we have to take up things and where we have to be serious about rethinking classical models of whichever term you want to use, representative democracy and government. We have to do it. But at the same time, we have to be careful and not put a label on something that seems to be new, losing the ability to govern. This is a major tension, and I think this is something where we have to take up this challenge and say, with all these new means, new information technology, taking knowledge serious, taking technology as well serious in terms of accessibility of information, we simply have to go further there in consideration of what we do with it and where we want to go with it. And there I come to the end, and I think what it is really about, we have to reintegrate this as well. It is not just about, okay, we have some governance mechanism and we have to rethink them, but we have to link this into the thinking about production, into the thinking about economics and the economy. Where do we want to go with economy? If we go back to what I said in the beginning, re-embedding economics, then we can see actually as well this mechanism of re-embedding political control into economics and vice versa. I don't know if I said really anything new, because at least Karl Polanyi, Hungarian colleague, had been very much talking about this. The problem he saw in economics was in gain orientation, instead in terms of a social imbalanced economy. What I say is very much the same. It is not GDP, not economic activities that we have to look on, but it is to look at the huge potential that we have in these societies we are talking about. And I think, coming to the final note, what one particular issue is in China, in Latin America, as far as I know it, is that these countries have a huge tradition, and they are aware of this tradition, and they are increasingly aware of this. If we look at Bolivia, if we look at the indigenous people and things like this. This is something where I think Europe has a little bit, should be a little bit careful in saying we are the crash of modern society. Maybe they are, maybe Europe is with the Enlightenment, but maybe it was a little bit as well going too far in this one way of the eclipse of reason, to use another famous word. Thank you.
那个下面有请张磊研究员为我们带来他的演讲。他的演讲技术是从必要性